Hey, welcome back. Welcome back. If you haven't watched the first video, this is video two. If you haven't watched the first video, then I encourage you to go back and watch that one because none of the other ones will make sense. Specifically, this one. It will not make sense if you don't understand what perceptions are. And that's what we covered in the first video. So on this on this video for unlocking the warrior within, right? The question, how to unlock it is the question. I want to get into this checking the voices. Now, what do I mean by checking the voices? What does this mean? I'm going to paint this. I'm going to give you my perception. All right. Our hearts and minds are garden beds. And so it naturally follows that the voices or the words are the seeds that are sown into those garden beds, right? Let me say this one more time. Our hearts and our minds are garden beds, and the voices or the seeds are the words that are sown in into those garden beds, right? So into the heart and into the mind, right? And so it's a perception of mine, but it goes back to checking your perception. So if you look at the way you think or speak about yourself, those things typically come from the mind and out of the heart. And so there's certain things that happen in that space. And so I wanted to make this analogy to the voices as seeds and our hearts and our minds as garden beds. Now, the importance of this is just like it is difficult to grow an apple tree if the seeds planted are going to produce a pear or a pear tree or a strawberry grove. It's really difficult to grow an apple tree if the seeds that are sown are not apple seeds, right? And seeds to develop an apple tree. So another thing to consider is the ability of the soil to be poisoned, making the seeds unable to grow because the ground is not right. So there are toxins and things like that that can get into the atmosphere or into the soil, and it, depending on the level of toxicity, it creates a barrier to growth, right? The soil essentially becomes unusable, right? And this is just anecdotally, but I watched this show called Homestead Rescue, and this is where that really stuck out to me. It was a couple that they bought a whole bunch of farmland because they want to live off grid, and they were struggling to grow anything in the ground, and it did not dawn on them until the people that came out to rescue them did some soil samples and checking the soil, and there was a high level of toxicity in the soil, basically rendering it unusable for purposes of planting. So no matter how much they cultivated that soil, it would not yield anything because it wasn't, the soil had been, basically rendered unusable. Now remember, heart, heart and mind and heart are garden beds. So is your garden bed poisoned? If not, if so, then we need to, fortunately, there is a way to relinquish the toxins in the soils of your heart and your mind. But if it is not, and you're seeing things growing that are not what you want, then we have to check the voices. We have to check the seeds that were sown. Right. So now recall the challenge that you faced, and take a moment now, if necessary, to bring it back to the front, bring it back to the fore. Right. Now consider the soil. Is it still prime? Does bringing that, another way of thinking about that is, does thinking about that particular challenge that you faced, does it release toxins into the soil? Can you sense toxins coming into the soil of your heart and your mind? Okay. If it's not, then consider the things that you thought or said about yourself, the things that others said about you. You don't know what people think because, but what people say about you. All right. Now, is it prime for growth or is it not? If the soil is good, then we need to look at the type of harvest that is coming in your garden. Are there so many weeds that it has outgrown your potential? Take note of this. So take note of it. We're going to come back to it. Take note of it. We're going to come back to it. So this is what you need to do, right? So is what happens when I think about this particular challenge? So the challenge that I'm gonna marry um, the first strategy. So thinking about the challenge and what has that has negatively impacted the way that you think and see and think about yourself. And now that you've brought that to the front and into the here and now, what is it? Does that does that challenge kill all the crops, right? Because it brings up a lot of toxic thinking. Was there a lot of seeds sown either by yourself or other people that created overgrowth and a whole bunch of weeds? And you did your best to try to clear the weeds out, but they still are coming back, right? Just notice that, because if you check your perception, then you check your voices, the seeds, you can begin to identify what type of work needs to be done in order to cultivate your heart and your mind for growth, right? So, and then now that you got this and you're checking the voices and you're checking what's happened to the soil, or is it the soil that is unfruitful or barren, or is the crops not the stuff that you were sowing or you were wanting? In the next video, we're going to talk about the impact. The impact. Okay. So keep all this stuff in mind. Notice I'm not giving you anything to do right now. I just want you to bring all of this stuff to the front. Bring it all up. Let it come. Don't avoid it. Just let it come and come to the surface and let it bubble so that we can do what we need to do. And if we don't allow the full impact to be experienced, then we start taking half measures to really undo stuff. It's like seeing a whole bunch of weeds and then the only thing that you do is run the lawnmower over it. You're going to cut it, but the weeds are going to come back because you haven't dealt with the problem. Okay. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. But for now, just notice, bring it up, see what's happening. Notice if the soil is barren or if the crops are produced or not what you want. All right. So that does it for this time. We're going to talk about impact in the next video, and I look forward to seeing you there.